This is another story where I am lucky enough that one of the eyewitnesses to the events was able to share it with me. My friend is a familiar face. We met in San LaSalle a long time ago, but these events took place long before she ever met me. Her Kimru accent blends through even as we chat. Her normal turtleneck sweater is off, and I can see the marks on her skin and neck. Alchemical symbols of sulfur, the cross of St. Peter, and pentagrams stained out raised from her skin. An ignorant or cruel soul would call them satanic. To someone who doesn't know anything about her, they may think they are tattoos. But knowing her for years, I know that these marks are not tattoos. They are scars. Scars made from the inside of her skin that were never allowed to heal properly. The marks of purple and red are from bruising that is never allowed to heal, keeping my interviewee in chronic pain. Marks that she often hides from the world that would be far crueler to her if they saw the marks that crisscross her skin. However, my friend is relaxed with me. We chose a library in a public place where we were able to have a quiet, private meeting for an hour. I'm still thankful to all of the services offered in Cathedral City, even if I'm not a fan of the Pontifex. I serve tea from a thermos for us both, and we snack on sponge cakes from a local gas station. She rarely treats herself, but she will do so in polite company, and as we snack and drink tea, we discuss local news and catch up in each other's lives before my friend decides to speak about what happened. We both know that is the purpose of this meeting, but even knowing that, she wants to delay it just for a bit. She has not had a happy life. She has faced many hardships, but she is still determined to turn her pain and anger into something beautiful. She works full time in one of the only secular addiction clinics in all of Cathedral City. She has helped countless people reclaim their lives, and during the weekends, she's often consulting or making art. And here I am, helping to transform even a small part of her pain she wants me to share, and what she wants to transform. I will not publish a single thing she does not want me to, and I look forward to meeting with her again.
When I was chosen for the project, it hadn't even had a name yet. But I was chosen due to how well I scored in every theology exam in secondary school. Almost 2 years away from graduating, and I was chosen to be an intern for Dr. Rosaline. I had already done work for her part-time in Cathedral College, and I was chosen due to my ability to be discreet, and even secret government projects need someone to shred papers, make coffee, and bring the donuts. After months of setting up an ideal lab deep in one of the many forgotten basements in the Undercity, they finally set up the experiment in the sub-basement of a morgue. By that time, they barely cared about keeping secrets from me. They just loved to share their deepest, darkest secrets with me. It might be part of my charisma, but more likely it's my father's devilish good looks. Project Bethany, they finally named it, was going to need bodies from the morgue above. Bodies that had no friends, no family, no one to miss them. The many John, Jane, and Jay Does of Cathedral City that simply go missing and are never missed. It wouldn't surprise me if some of these dead does were made on purpose. I wouldn't put that past Dr. Rosaline. But it was named Project Bethany after Lazarus of Bethany. They thought that Project Lazarus gave away too much about what their plans were, but Project Bethany gave just enough mystery that someone who didn't know anything wouldn't suspect anything, but someone who knew what it was about would immediately understand what it was about. I'm sure Dr. Rosaline took credit for my idea, but I stopped caring years ago. At this point, I just hope that she's alright. Project Bethany was an experiment to snatch a soul after it had been judged, and then bind the soul into a dead body. The theory went that when a body lost its soul to judgment, that another one could occupy the body. Why did they want this? They thought there could be some value in summoning the souls in a controlled format, and they could ask historical figures, or even their own saints, questions about the past, and about what the afterlife was like. They were fully funded by the Pontifex, and they honestly thought they were going to greatly expand their holy book by using unholy magic. I have seen many dark things in my life. I have held books in my hand written by witches, demons, dictators, and even politicians. There is a sort of evil in the book that I can recognize. The way the pages have to be written in a place that the sun, moon, and stars could never touch. Written in cruel words that would bring illness to those who read it. The book that the head researcher had was far darker than any of that. The book practically dripped sin even when closed. People dared not to look at it directly because it made them nauseous. Not that any of them could read it. It was written in a strange cuneiform that wasn't one I recognized, older than even Sumerian and Aramaic, a language that only the head researcher could read, and he set up the experiment to those specifications in the book, though I don't know why anyone in the cathedral trusted him. The head researcher was an old man with the skull of a bird on a leather necklace. His eyes had a deep, passionate fire, and he practically oozed authority. Someone who was powerful and who knew he was powerful, but not someone who was born into power. He was someone who was powerful, but also knew how far the fall from power was. Someone who, even though he lived in comfort, would never forget the pain of sleeping on the streets. The very same look in my father's eyes. But the head researcher was definitely not my father, nor did he know my father personally. No matter who I asked, the head researcher did not disclose his name to anyone. Even when I shook his hand, he made my skin crawl when I touched his hand. There was something deeply wrong and upsetting with this man. I don't mean that he was a creep, though that was definitely also true. There was just something wrong. I have met many terrible people throughout my life. People who killed their own parents for their next dose. People who slaughtered the innocent in the name of the law. Thieves who stole for survival. Thieves who stole because they didn't think it was theft. Those who enslaved others. Those who used and abused others for their own pleasure. And even the cruelest of humanity who had no reason for cruelty other than to make the demons blush. The head researcher's sins were far darker than any of that. The walls around him were written in prophecy and promise, like the palace walls of Belshazzar. Writing that no one else could even see, but the head researcher's eyes often glanced over the writing and he only ignored it, clearly bored from the words telling him price, payment, partition, pardon, punishment. Such promises formed and broken wherever the head researcher stepped, invisible to all but myself. His hands gushed with the blood of all those he had slayed. A murderer's hands often do not wash off the blood. Usually it merely stained the hands. The generals and tyrants may have so much blood that it drips, blood that no one else can see. His hands were flooded with so much blood that merely standing near him would flood up to my knees in the untouchable blood that no one else could see. Even if you don't feel it, you feel disgusting being near someone who must have slaughtered billions. And the worst part was his forehead. It was branded with many different crimes and titles. Most people go their entire lives avoiding getting a single sinful title. A mark of a sinner, so much that the angels and demons that guard the bridge of trials would know to weigh them down. His marks changed every time I saw him again, and they never had a chance to repeat. Murderer, cannibal, slaver, necromancer, traitor, deal-breaker, and on and on. And yet no one else was able to recognize it, and as dark as the head researcher was, he did not recognize who I was. Usually, someone with far less sins would recognize me as an omen, a warning, a danger, an angel to some and a devil to others. And as covered and soaked in sin as he was, he should have known who I was just by meeting me. And yet even as I shook his hand, he did not care enough to remember my name. In the eyes of those that judge, the head researcher was not yet a guilty man. His sins and crimes were far greater than by any human I had ever seen, and yet in the eyes of judgment, he was not damned. His crimes were not yet greater than his kindness. It is because of this fact that I stayed with the experiment, curious what stakes someone like this would have in an experiment like this. If I left, I would have been in far greater danger, and I couldn't act as a balance to the danger. At that time, I felt no fear for myself. It was some of my darker days, the days where I was convinced I had no future. The future of the world was so bleak that death would come for me before I would have a true chance to grow up, and that my past was so dark I would have to spend the rest of my short life making up for it, and I would never be enough. I'm in a better place now, but that was my mindset, and why I stayed as the experiments began and I saw just how dark the head scientist could get. The symbols carved into the walls and floors were extremely detailed, calling up names so divine they hurt to try and read. And in the centre of the room was a single table, one meant to hold a person, almost like an operating table, but one not meant to hold any comfort. And they brought in the first patient, an old man who was dying with no family left, and who donated his body to science in exchange for a proper burial from the cathedral. I was never told his name, but I watched as he was brought in onto the table, and the only person allowed to see him was the priest. Through the viewing window I could see the old man's skin looked paper thin, that his breathing was weak, and the priest gave him his final rites, saying a prayer for the old man's soul as his heart rate slowed further, and he finally let out his last breath. His heart beat for the last time, and the time of death was called. And when that was done, the experiment began in earnest. A white sheet, written in golden versions of those strange symbols, covered the man's body, as the priest took one look at me and spat in front of me before leaving. I don't think anyone noticed. No one cared for the priest spitting at the intern. It was just another day for this obscure experiment for the church. When 30 minutes had passed, the head researcher began to play a tape that played the words inside the chamber. This part I did know a bit. The incantation could not be recorded in whole because it would mean its activation, so it had to be in parts, with different parts recorded at different times, and then edited together to play at the right time. This would allow the incantation to be recorded without triggering the experiment, but it would also allow the incantation to play without having to rely on something as unreliable as a person, and the spell would be spoken correctly every single time. An early example of techno-sorcery, but one of the more reliable uses of it. Being able to copy and paste spells without human help. Being able to keep it going indefinitely was something sought after by the esoteric arts for countless millennia. Whatever the spell said within the chamber, we couldn't hear it. The tapes only played in the room, and the intercom was off. But as the tapes played, we watched as the body underneath the sheet twitched and moved. There were gasps as the hands dropped and the sheet was removed. The body underneath sat straight up and the sheet dropped from its face. The face drooped, and the old man was clearly still dead. The heart monitor was flatlined, and his respiration was minimal, more out of a habit than sustaining life, and yet the man was back. Once he realized he was back, he started to scream. He screamed loudly enough we could hear it through the windows, and as he screamed, "Send me back, send me back, send me back," the old man screamed, which confused everyone there, except for the head scientist, who pressed the button for the intercom. "We will send you back, but you will need to answer some questions for us first." That sentence that answered none of the other scientists' questions made the old man shut up. He stopped screaming, and he continued to sit up straight, waiting for the head scientist's questions. He had no reason to think the head scientist was telling the truth, but wherever he wanted to go, he believed that the head scientist was telling the truth. "Can you tell us who you are and where you were born?" the head scientist asked. "Robert Oak. I was born around the year 2000 in Westshire Albion," Robert answered, while the scientists scrambled down their results. The man was old, sure, but he wasn't over 700 years old. And his voice was very different. When he was he brought back wrong? "Excellent. Now, Robert, can you tell us how you died?" the head scientist asked, which brought a wince upon Robert's dead, drooping face. "I was mugged on the way to the public house. I never saw the mugger's face, but I remember the feeling of a knife between my ribs, and getting really sleepy before waking up to judgment." This brought a few more remarks from the scientists as they wrote it down. The man before us was not the same man who died less than an hour ago. He wasn't changed from dying and coming back. He was literally not the same man. A different soul in his body after his death. Somehow the head researcher found a way to plant a different soul back in the old man's body, but where was he getting them? "Thank you, Robert. And now the final question. If you can tell us where you came from, we can send you back." This question made Robert very uncomfortable as his eyes flipped to all of the walls. "Don't you already know where I came from?" Of course I do, but I need you to say it for documentation purposes. I can't say, Robert said, his head in his hands. Wherever he was from, he didn't want to say. Even if it was going to bring him back to where he came from, he wouldn't say. I've heard enough, Robert. Enjoy Utopia for us all, he said, as he turned off the intercom and played a different tape. Another one we couldn't hear, but as it played, Robert convulsed on the operating table for a moment, before he stood still again. The second tape finished, and the head researcher took out the final tape. Prepare for the worst, just in case, he warned us as he started to play the tape. So I didn't know how he wanted us to prepare for the worst. As the tape played, even though I couldn't hear it, I felt like I had heard it before. Like the tune you hear as a child, and even if you go years without hearing it, it's in the back of your head. You can sing along with it if you hear it, but if someone asked you to say the words, you couldn't. Whatever was on that tape, it was so close to my heart that it was making part of my brain itch. This time, the body took a long, slow breath, and the heart started again. It wasn't a regular sinus rhythm, and more like it was spasming endlessly, but it was close to life. The body sat up slowly, adjusting to the body much slower than before. I was certain the soul was different this time. This one was much more cautious, and unlike the one before, it didn't start screaming. The body kept glancing around, and the body kept breathing, and the heart kept spasming. This result seemed closer to what he wanted. Hello there, can you tell us your name? He asked, as the body who looked up at the speaker. And he shook his head. I don't remember my name anymore. In Pandemonium, you lose your name. Slowly, but you do lose it. Flesh heals, scars fade, pain weakens. The torture passes, but the memories fade. In time, you forget who you were. All I remember is a few memories that are barely more than a dream to me. Dreams of a place called Earth. The head researcher smiled at this. I don't like the way he smiled. It was like he was going to have a chance to be cruel and he was going to use it. Tell us about your dream. Do what we ask, and I promise we will keep you away from Pandemonium. The head researcher promised, a promise that again the body believed. Why did they believe him? Why did everyone always believe him when I could see he was a liar? Even when a liar tells the truth, they're still a liar. And I could tell deep in my bones, even though he was telling the truth, he could not be trusted. How do I know this isn't another torture of Pandemonium? The body hissed, and the head researcher chuckled. Have you ever been tortured in a body that wasn't yours before? He asked, and the body thought before it answered, no. Then you know you can trust us. So tell us about your dreams of Earth, the head researcher asked, and the body spoke. I remember there were green forests, a white sky, a wine-dark sea, water clear that you could drink, gold that didn't bite when you held it. There was joy, sleep, soft beds. I could see tears in the eyes of the corpse. Not regular tears either. They were closer to black pus than anything, as the tears fell and the body twitched. Was it a dream? The body asked the head researcher, who shook his head. No, it wasn't. It was once your life. Do you remember why you were sent to Pandemonium? Or maybe what your sentence was? The head researcher asked the old man, who tilted his head as he thought. And he tried to recall what he did that damned him to hell, or what his exact punishment was. I was a sailor, a well-respected one, sought after by a king and a queen, a recently united kingdom. They had dreams of conquering a new world. They needed workers, labourers. I travelled down the coast. I took slaves. I told the king and queen they would make good workers. I led 3 ships across Oceanus, but the slaves broke out and killed us all before we made it to landfall. I don't remember my name, but I remember the pain. I remember the iron collar, the contraption to seal shut my mouth, leaving only my tongue sticking out, the branding iron on my back, the lashes from the whip and the switch. The rest of my men were killed quickly, while I was not given such mercy. They weighed me down with the iron chains, the same I used to carry them across Oceanus, and they threw me over the side of the ship. The heavy iron carried me deep into the sea, far from the light above. My lungs burned, and I was crushed under both the weight of iron and the weight of the sea. When I died, I didn't know I had died. I just remember falling deeper and deeper as everything grew heavier, and then I fell onto a sandy shore, the shore of a small sandbar that was being washed away by the ocean. My chains came with me, but in the bridge of trials the chains were even heavier. Every single link felt as heavy as the ocean. The only way off the island was a bridge that was barely standing. It was made from rotting plants and barnacles, but on the other side I could see safety. A land where I could be safe. A land that was visible underneath a full moon. Even with my chains, seeing the moonlight was something that reassured me. No matter how long you were in Pandemonium, you never stop dreaming of moonlight and sunlight. It's a hope that never diminishes, something that drives you to keep going, even under the weight of infinity. You have that hope. And it was that hope that drove me to take step after agonizing step across that broken down bridge. When I crossed the bridge of trials, I was also elsewhere. I remembered walking across the bridge, but I also stood before an infinite jury. But the infinite jury was also a singular judge. The witnesses behind me were all those I had known, and those I had never known but I had had an impact on. The witnesses were nearly as infinite as the jury. While I struggled across the bridge, so I also struggled in the courtroom. My crimes were read to the judges by one who stood against me, my prosecutor. Every crime read out made my burden on the bridge heavier. I could feel the wood bow under my steps, and I could feel the salt of the sea on my face. And in the court I had someone speak on my behalf, my exhaustion holding me down, while my own lawyer spoke to the judges, telling them my reasoning behind every sin, every choice, trying to argue I did what I thought was right. And as I made it halfway across the bridge, the judge gave me a choice. I could lighten my load if the good I created in the world outweighed the evil. When those words were spoken, my heart sank, along with my body, as I fell through the bridge, and I was still in front of the infinite jury. As I stood there, I was given my sentence. The sailor was silent for a moment, clearly remembering his sentence was very traumatic, but it was one he was willing to share with us all. I was told until I had lived through every lifetime that I stole, I would sail across the sea of blood in Pandemonium, dealing with trials and tribulations until I lived through every lifetime. It was explained to me that it wasn't just the lives of people I had enslaved, but those I had killed, and all the descendants of those I had stolen their lives from. Truly a countless number of lives. As I fell into that endless pit, I begged the judge for mercy, for a way to end my sentence early. They spoke as one. They told me that another way I could earn reprieve for my sentence was to sail my ship across the sea of blood, same distance as the distance between worlds. The sailor held his head in his hands while he whimpered. I don't know which would be longer, so I fell for 9 days, thinking about my sentence. When I fell to a caravel made from bone and the sails made from skin, both were slick and sickening to the touch, and I would have to sail the ship myself across the sea of blood, an ocean that remained warm, and the blood would remain liquid until it splashed onto my ship, hardening into scabs and slowing my ship even more. I don't know how long I was sailing, but I was sailing for longer than I lived. The sailor finished as the head researcher wrote in his notes. Well, you're back in the land of the living now, and you've earned a bit of a reprieve. Serve me and do what I say, and I will keep you out of the sea of blood. For how long? For as long as you serve me, the head researcher said, and the sailor nodded his head furiously. After hearing his story, I was certain the sailor would have gone through 1,000,000 lifetimes before going back to Pandemonium for even a single second. The time to sail between worlds would have been a minimum of over 6,000,000 years. And paying back for stolen lives was a much more difficult thing to gauge. But if I was to make a rough guess, it would be a minimum of 100,000,000 years. The only way to lessen that sentence would be to return the stolen lives back to those it had been stolen from. Though I don't think that's what the head researcher was thinking about as he ordered guards to bring the sailor food and water. This does prove my hypothesis. A soul taken from heaven only wants to go back, but a soul from hell wants to do anything to avoid going back. That is going to help me a lot, the head researcher said as he continued his notes and more rooms were prepared. I was soon taken off the project, but there were dozens of rooms prepared, all of them full of bodies ready to take souls from hell. Every single one of them is eager for even a moment out of eternal perdition. I don't know how many were brought back in the name of the Pontifex, but I do know that the head researcher was looking for someone specific in Pandemonium. But there's hundreds of billions of souls in Pandemonium. He may be spending the rest of eternity looking for them, and never find the one soul he's looking for. Though maybe he'll find it sooner, and if he does, I shudder to think what he'll do with all those possessed bodies.
My friend stops speaking before she smiles again, trying to smile even in the face of adversity. We both know it's an ongoing problem, but by sharing this information with me, we can do something about what the Bethany experiment is doing. I don't have an easy answer, though. Does someone as evil and cruel as the sailor deserve 6 million years sailing the sea of blood? Does offering the damned a reprieve offer greater good for the world, or am I denying some cosmic justice? Would releasing all of the possessed be worth it if I knew that every single one of the possessed are being sent back to endless punishment? Was offering them time on Earth even a kindness? Even if the sailor spends 10,000 years in a rotting body on Earth, that's barely a drop in the ocean of his punishment. It would barely be the amount of time that a person spends on a single daydream compared to an entire lifetime. It is questions like this that I pose to my friend, and she offers answers quickly and honestly. Taking a moment of reprieve can offer an eternity of hope. Even after all these centuries, the sailor remembers the sun and the moon. There is no sun, no stars, and no moon on Pandemonium. Even as he forgets his name, forgets he was human, and even while his soul and mind are crushed under the weight of eternity, he will keep pushing himself and keep sailing because he remembers the moon and the sun, and at the end of his sentence, he will see them again. That answer offers me some comfort as I embrace my friend and she puts on her sweater before leaving. Still, as much as she has offered me, the most valuable thing she offered me is knowledge that the necromancer is here in Cathedral City. I will find you, you bastard. I know you're listening, but I will find you, and the world will know what you've done, and you cannot escape it through anonymity.